Hey class, hope you're doing well. I'm staying well during this crazy time. Anyway, here's another PowerPoint. I know you're going to be thrilled and chilled. This is a very important PowerPoint though, because it's going to go over the structure of a speech, and this will tell you how to do your outline. This is the outline that you're going to follow for your final speech. Remember, you get to choose whether you want to do a persuasive speech or an informative speech. And this whole PowerPoint show goes with two sample speeches that I'm uploading. One is the informative speech on medical robots, and the other one is the persuasive speech on phony pharmaceuticals. So I tried, you can listen to those speeches over and over, and I tried to match this PowerPoint to those speeches so you could see the examples. Now, don't pay too much attention to that guy's delivery in the medical robot speech. His delivery is kind of dry. He needs more animation and vocal variety and all of that fun stuff. But it's a great speech to listen to for structure. So here we go, the structure or the outline. So first thing you want to do is you kind of can think in threes. The first main threes are just like an English essay. You've got your introduction, the body, and the conclusion. That's how the speech is structured. But what typically happens when people give a speech? Everyone, it's the dreaded speech day or the dreaded presentation day, right? And the professor calls the name of the first student. And the student goes up there and says something like, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Civil War, blah, 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 yada, 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 yada." And then it ends with, "That's it," right? Then the second student goes up there, and it goes something like this. "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and today I'm going to talk to you about World War II. La 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 la, yada 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 yada, blah 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 blah." That's it. The third person gets up and they decide they're going to be a little bit different. "Good afternoon, class. My name is so and so, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Vietnam War. La 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 la, yada 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 yada, blah 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 blah. Thank you." Okay. And it goes on like this, does it not, for another 20 some odd presentations? They all start the same way and they all end the same way. One word for this class, one word. Boring. You do not want to start your speech with, "Hi, my name is, and today I'm going to talk about." That is actually your thesis sentence. That actually comes at the end of the intro, not the beginning. So instead, you want to get the audience's attention. You want to start with a question or a quote or a startling statistic. You can even use a short story or a narrative or an interesting photograph that are all related to your topic. So when you're looking, an example of this is when you look at the persuasive speech, which is the phony pharmaceutical speech. She starts with photographs of the two sets of pills and she asks a question, right? Something like, "Hey, can you tell the difference between these two pills?" And so she doesn't start with, "Hi, my name is, and today I'm going to talk to you about phony pharmaceuticals," and be like, "Oh, goody, we can hardly wait." Instead, she gets our attention with the photos of the two pills and her questions about it and sets it up. The other example of the attention getter in the informative speech on medical robots is he starts with the story or case study of Maureen having her kidney removed by a surgical robot. So see, that's what we mean. You want to start with an attention getter. And we didn't get a chance to do the narrative speech. Remember, we were going to do the embarrassing moment speech or the memorable moment speech, but because of this darn pandemic, I'm having to condense things. But the purpose of that speech was to show you that you can use a personal narrative, so a little story, personal story that you have that's related to your topic, or a case study or someone else's story, that in itself can be an attention getter for the audience. And the medical robot speech shows how he uses it for the story, for them. He tells the story of Maureen. And that's a common thing to do, is to start with a little story or a case study. Sometimes, for example, say you were doing an informative speech about some type of cancer, maybe on breast cancer. Well, what if you started off and you told the story of how your aunt got it or your mother, just to get the audience's attention? So anyway, that's one way. Go to the next slide here. The next thing, so after you get the audience's attention, and there's various ways to do that, then you need a credibility statement. And this is your speaker ethos. What do you stand for? Why should the audience listen to you? Have you done extensive research on the topic? Are you going into this field? Have you volunteered yourself? Have you been at war? Have whatever your topic is, if you have any special expertise or simply have done a lot of research, you need to let the audience know. Maybe you yourself, if you're trying to persuade us to volunteer in the community, maybe you yourself are a volunteer. And so you mention that, you throw that in. For example, in the medical robot informative speech, the speaker notes that he's a pre-med student, that he's done a lot of research, and he's always been fascinated with the topic of medical robots. So there you go. In the phony pharmaceutical persuasive speech, she tells, here's the personal narrative, she tells about what happened to her sister, that her sister actually received some phony pills and almost, was sickened, almost died from it. So again, this is the credibility. This is still your introduction. Start with your attention getter. Now we're on to your credibility. Think about, how did Kelly McGonigal and Amy Cuddy establish their credibility? How did they also get the audience's attention? You could go back to those speeches and look. Well, they established their credibility. McGonigal talks about being a health psychologist, and then Cuddy mentions that she's a professor at a competitive business school. Of course, that competitive business school is actually Harvard. But so you throw in your credibility statement. Then the next thing you want to do is establish rapport with your audience and relevant. How do you make your topic relevant to your audience? Why should they care about your topic? Okay, that's part of your audience analysis. Why should we care? Why should the audience care? How is the information or the persuasive stance you're trying to get people to do or help the audience with their own lives? So again, this is your audience analysis. Relate your purpose and topic to the audience's attitudes, beliefs, values. Remember, in a persuasive speech, you're trying to change those. In an informative speech, you are not. So example, in the medical robot speech, he notes that you or someone you know might encounter a medical robot the next time they go to the hospital or visit a doctor or whatever it is. So he talks about, hey, you need to know about this because this might happen to you if you have to go to the hospital. And good Lord, this becomes a lot more relevant with this pandemic, doesn't it? But anyway, also in the phony pharmaceutical speech, she states her relevance by stating that lives are at stake. If you get these phony pharmaceuticals, people can die. So that's how she establishes her relevance. Notice this also is attached to her value system. In stating that lives are at stake, we know that that's what she cares about, that human life is the most important thing, and that speaks to her ethical system as a speaker. So that's that. We're still in the introduction. Now you come to your thesis. Now this is your today I'm going to talk to you about statement, or today I'd like to persuade you statement. So what's the robot speech thesis, the medical robot speech? He says, I'd like to introduce you to the world of medical robots. So, there it is. We know we're going to hear about medical robots. In the persuasive pharmaceutical speech, she tells us what we need to change, what she's trying to change. And so she says, I'm convinced that we need to take action now to combat phony pharmaceuticals. In a persuasive speech, that's where you state your persuasive stance, what you think, what you believe needs to be changed, the need plus the action. Then finally, last part of the intro is what we call a preview statement. You want to tell the audience what are the main points of your speech, and the main points that you list in your preview should match the A, B, and C in the body of your speech. So, example from the medical robot speech, he says, we'll take a look at 3 types of robots in particular: orderly robots, remote presence robots, and surgical robots. So now the audience knows that in the body, we're going to hear about those 3 types of robots. And then he uses a transition into his first main point. So first, let's take a look at orderly robots. Now, class, this all may sound very repetitive, but let me tell you something. This is the difference between reading an English essay and listening to a speech, or writing an English essay and writing a speech. Remember, you're writing a speech for a listening audience. With an English essay, you're writing that essay for a reading audience. If a reading audience misses something, they can go back and reread it in an essay. In a speech, your audience cannot. So the more you can tag for your audience, the structure, your points that you're going over, the better their understanding will be, the better they'll be able to follow your speech. So there's the intro. Your attention getter, you establish your ethos statement, why we should listen to you. You build up a little bit of rapport with the audience. You care about your audience. What you're going to discuss with them today is going to really help them. Then your thesis, what's the whole purpose of your speech? Why are you what are you going to talk about today? What's your main topic? And then your preview. What are the 3 main points you're going to go over? It doesn't always have to be 3 points. It could be 3 to 5 or sometimes 2, but just kind of aim for 3. It makes it easier to remember. So there we go. And if we continue with looking at the example of the preview from the pharmaceutical speech, she says, later in my speech, I will be sharing with you my plan for curbing the spread of these dangerous drugs. Now, in my humble opinion, her preview should have been stated more clearly, because in this persuasive speech, she's basically doing a problem, cause, solution speech. That is a classical persuasive format. If you see any kind of discourse structured in problem, cause, solution, that is a classical persuasive form. So she says, first we will examine how serious this problem is. Next, we will note what is causing this problem. And finally, I will persuade you that my plan will solve the problem of phony pharmaceuticals. That would have been a better preview. Then we would have known we're going to hear the problem, we're going to hear what's causing it, we're going to hear how we can solve it. It's persuasive in that first you have to prove to the audience that the problem is serious. Next, you have to prove to the audience or argue about what's causing the problem. And finally, you've got to argue or persuade your audience that your plan to solve the problem is going to work. And then her transition. So first, let's start by taking a look at the problem. Okay, so there's your intro. Next, we go into your body. So this is the main, obviously, part of your speech. So first, you state your first main point, and you state it as a sentence. And then you've got your subpoints, all your research and information that explains your first main point or supports it. So your evidence, your definitions, examples, quotes, you need to cite your sources, your facts, your statistics, your examples, all of that in your first main point. So from the medical robot speech, if you go back and listen to it, his first main point is he's going to tell us about orderly robots. And his subpoints include examples, information, citations about orderly robots. Listen for his citations. He'll say, according to the medical journal, da 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 da, or according to Dr. So-and-so. And so he'll list the title. If it's a written source, he lists the title, the author, and the date. So listen for those, because then we know, oh, look, these are facts. He did his research. He's not just pulling this, out of his head somewhere. These are actual sources with good information. I wish our damn politicians had to do the same thing, but that's another story. Then, if you listen to the first main point in the pharmaceutical speech, Her first main point argues that the problem is significant because of the dangers. Her subpoints outline the specific dangers with facts and statistics along with her sources, and argues that this phony pharmaceuticals, this problem of phony pharmaceuticals is really serious and lives are at stake. So that's the first A point. Then you need a transition. You want to tell the audience, now that I've talked about my first point, I'm moving on to my second point. Again, it helps them follow your speech. So, for example, in the medical robot speech, he says, now that we know what orderly robots are, let's move on to another type of medical robot, the remote presence robot. Notice that his main points match his preview. And then she says something like, or she should have, now that we understand the dangerous problem of phony pharmaceuticals, let's examine what's causing this problem. Okay, so there's the question. Now the second main point, you do the same thing as your first main point. You talk about your second main point. You support it with subpoints and examples, facts, illustrations, and so on. He explains remote presence robots, and then in the phony pharmaceuticals, she explains that lots of money is made from selling phony drugs, and she backs it up with sources. She's arguing that this is what's causing it. It's a money-making enterprise, and it's not well regulated. Okay. Then she's got her transition sentence into the third point. We've talked about this point on to the final point. So, and you do the same thing. Your third main point along with all your subpoints. In the robot speech, his third main point is explaining surgical robots. In the phony pharmaceutical speech, here's where she persuades us that what her solution to the problem of phony pharmaceuticals is, and her subpoints outline her plan, which she argues will work. She uses quotes by experts and other evidence to support her argument that her plan will indeed work. Okay? And finally, we get to the conclusion. And here you need the summary statement. And guess what? Your summary statement restates your preview in different words. So example, in the medical speech, we've seen how medical robots are transforming modern medicine, whether it's running errands for hospital employees, helping doctors connect with their patients, or acting as a surgeon's eyes and hands. Medical robots have brought the future into the present. Notice he basically said we've just talked about orderly robots, remote presence robots, and surgical robots, but he did it in different words. He defined them. Then what do you do after that in the conclusion? You restate your purpose and thesis. Okay, audience, this is what I want you to take away from my speech. So example, in phony pharmaceuticals, she says, by implementing the plan I have outlined here, we will be able to control this public health menace. You're basically restating your thesis. What's the main point? Also telling the audience what you want them to do. We need to implement this plan, she says. And then finally, your closing statement is not, that's it. You want to, or thank you. I mean, you can say thank you, but don't make that your your final line. You want a powerful ending line. And so typically what we do is we end as we began. You use that final line should refer back to your attention getter in some way. So, example, in his medical robot speech, he ends it with, medical robots are now a matter of science fact, which isn't too bad, but I would have come back to that story of Maureen because that's what he started with. So his closure could have been even stronger. I would have returned to the opening story of Maureen and said, how is she doing now? So I would have said, medical robots are now a matter of science fact. And you may be wondering, what has happened to Maureen, the woman I mentioned at the beginning of my speech who had her kidney removed by a surgical robot? She made a speedy recovery with no complications and is already back to enjoying the activities she loves. I think that would have strengthened his speech because there's your case study, there's the narrative. Remember, when you use a narrative, it can create emotional appeal, and once again, it personalizes it. It puts a human face to the statistics. And in a persuasive speech, it creates that emotional appeal, that pathos that Aristotle talked about. One of the things I did want to mention in a persuasive speech, remember, it's different from an informative. Informative, think of it as a class lecture. You're not trying to get us to change the way we think, believe, or act. You're not trying to get us to change anything. You're not advocating for anything. You're just telling us information. But in a persuasive speech, you are. You're trying to get us to change our attitudes, beliefs, values, and/or behavior. And if you can hook it to a need, right? That also creates logic. It's logical to fulfill other people's needs. If someone's hungry, you give them a sandwich. If they're thirsty, you give them a glass of water. So there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the first level is physiological needs. Okay? The need for food, clean air, water, shelter, even sex, basic needs. Then you move up to safety and security. Well, guess what? Her speech on phony pharmaceuticals is appealing to the safety need, the safety and security. We have a right to have safe drugs, okay, safe medicine. Then it moves up to social needs, okay, needing to volunteer, needing to be part of our community, needing to belong. Hold on, class, I've got to call. Patrick, the food's here. Sorry, I'm not re-recording this. Hold on, class. Patrick, the food is here. Yes. Anyway, class, sorry about that. Real life here in the quarantine. What can we say? Anyway, so you can link it to social needs, needing to belong to our community, needing to be accepted by by our tribe, so to speak. So things like getting the latest iPhone, dating apps, anything like that talks about our social needs. Then the next thing we move up to is self-esteem needs. So we want to feel good about ourselves. We want to look good. We want to feel confident. So, weight loss programs, gym memberships, the self-help section of the bookstore, anything that helps us be a better person. And then finally, the very top of Maslow's hierarchy is what we call self-actualization. And this is the need to reach your highest potential as a human being. And EPCC pretty much goes for that level. EPCC, the best place to start and finish, achieve your dreams, right? And the Army's old slogan was be all that you can be, join the Army, you know? So it's appealing to that self-actualization. So if you can link your persuasive statement to a need and persuade us that what you're trying to get us to do solves for that need or fulfills that need, that's a good strategy. So that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's in your book in the persuasive. The next slide, I wanted to point out that there's other persuasive speech outlines, but there's certain ways that you structure your outline in a persuasive speech that creates the logic of your argument. And there's several, but I would just do these two are the easiest ones. The problem cause solution speech, which the phony pharmaceutical speech follows. And the one that's the easiest of all is statement of reasons. So you tell us your thesis, what you're trying to get us to do. We need to vote for 3 main reasons. And you would tell us what they are. We need to vote because it's our responsibility as American citizens. And you would go through your reasons, number 1, number 2, number 3, and support it. So I wanted to throw that in. Anyway, class, that's the basic structure of a speech. This is what you will follow. This is the outline you will follow for that final speech assignment. In Blackboard, I'm also attaching the speech template for you. There's one that's the speech template at a glance, and then there's one with blanks. If you just fill that blank one out in complete sentences and follow it with the Roman numeral 1, A, attention getter, and you would actually put your attention getter in. B, your credibility statement. C, your rapport relevant statement. D, your thesis. E, your preview. You just write those out as incomplete sentences and follow that. You'll be golden. That's your outline. Just don't forget your bibliography of 5 sources at the end. Okay, class, I hope that helps. And don't stress. Just do the best you can. You know, I'm not going to be grading these the way I would in a normal time because we're we're all having to adjust to different situations. So don't stress. Do the best you can. Give me something. Give me some kind of speech and just go for it. Choose a topic that you really care about. That's the main thing. And just do the best you can. Do a little bit of research, get your 5 sources, put it into this format, listen to those sample speeches I'm going to post, and just go for it, class. And then hopefully we will get out of this pandemic and all of that soon. Stay well. I hope your friends and your family stay well, and take care. Megan, how do I make this stop?